Okay, let's go ahead and continue. Hey, so where I want to start off with is bring in what Darren was saying, and I want to bring in that reference about Bishop that I said, because it's news we've been watching between him and Montana, etc. And I was asked to maybe talk about the 4-Fry. Better yet, I'm going to play an audio clip from the chief of the 4-Fry team. It's only 20 seconds. It's all you need to hear in 20 seconds about the real agenda. And you can ask them why we've spent $2.7 million on meetings and haven't cut a tree yet in 7 years. But here is some of the basis that started off the county attorney's office going to the state AG's office for cross-reference, and that we took to Chief Tidwell's office and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And the Fish and Wildlife Regional Director was he was very impressed with it, and all he did the whole day, in fact, he was in our county. He came up with his staff to teach us how to really go through the spotted owl issue, even though he was the management agency. We have some that are actual scientists that do their job, and if you ask them, they have to tell you facts, not political opinions. So we had a group like that there. But this is out of the U.S. Attorney's Manual. You can look this up if you want. It's Section 665 of Title IX, and it just talks about determining federal jurisdiction. And where this comes into play is because there are different types of jurisdiction on every inch of land in America. And in a rough sense, they're broken into 5 levels, ranging from Category 1, which is exclusive jurisdiction. That would be like Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 of the Constitution. Okay, that's your forts, docks, arsenals, things like that. Down to 5, which is unknown. There is no unknown, trust me. Unknown by law has to be like public lands, something that has no prior claims to it. And you won't find it, I don't believe, an inch of land in America that somebody hasn't made claim to in some form or another. So really it goes 1 through 4, which is custodial interest only. So you could say that's the lowest because unknown really doesn't exist.
It's proprietary, custodial?
Yeah, it's the same thing, Category 4. Mm-hmm.
Can you give us those categories?
Huh?
Can you give us those categories?
Yeah, I got the chart here, so I'll show you the actual chart. But so right here, this is in the U.S. Attorney's Manual, and what this is to their attorneys in the Department of Justice. They're giving in Section 665, they're telling the attorneys, and you can look it up, how to go about developing a case. So they're telling you, make sure you have jurisdiction to begin with before you start squandering money and time. Okay? So if the land is other than a military base, the Regional Counsel's Office of the GSA. Okay, now it's your General Services Administration, and they're broke down by regions, much like your circuit courts. So like in my case, I have the 9th Circuit in Frisco. My GSA is also up there. Now that's not synonymous across the U.S., just an example. They have the complete roster. Recently for Kansas in the fall, I got them a new roster for some towns and cities there around Kansas City, and now it's all on pretty Excel spreadsheets and all that with cumulative amounts and formulas like that species sheet. It's changed format, it hasn't changed intent nor duty. They warned their own attorneys that each U.S. attorney would be well advised to request from each agency within the district to report on the jurisdictional status claim for each of its facilities and assurance that documentation is available. Now, you can imagine why, because they don't want to get out in the wind, theoretically, and get the case handed to them, if you will, in a bad way. But here is that map of the GSA regions. So you can see, and I'm going to go in detail on the next slide, but see, I'm clumped in here with Nevada, California. Now you all's with Wyoming, Montana, etc. And there you go. There's us, and here's you. They call you the Rocky Mountain region. Here's your regional council. There's the phone numbers if you want them. And this whole folder today, all the data you've seen and just stuff that you'll like to see, I think, after the class that I won't cover, but you'll understand it, is in a folder that I'm giving to Darren on a little stick drive. Everything from today. So you can get anything today that you may want. But there's your stuff for your specific region right there. Here's, on that category 4, code 4, proprietorial interest only, and it's also deemed custodial interest only. This term is applied to those instances wherein the federal government has acquired some right or title to an area in a state, but has not obtained any measure of the state's authority over the area. Okay? So keep that in mind when I show you these charts here in a second. Now, one thing that comes out is I've had agency people tell me, well, we fall under the needful building clause. Our whole forest, our grasslands, this BLM area, whatever. And that some agency people thought that until it went to court. And they lost. Okay. Collins versus Yosemite Park and Curie Company proved that needful buildings does not include forest and parklands already. It's already been tried and done. So if an agency person locally, the kind that likes to tell you their handbook says this, tries to pull that on you, don't worry about it. Here's the citations for this one as well. The Organic Act of 1897, the Weeks Forestry Act of 1911, which was a dual-pronged update for 2 reasons. One is there was kind of an agenda, if you will, to how can we better protect the watersheds that in most cases emanate from forested areas, and how do we get rid of some of the loopholes we had in the Organic Act with settlements and western expansion. Congress authorized the states to retain jurisdiction over all national forest lands. Okay, right in those acts that form the basis for the Forest Service, if you will. Okay, now when it comes to roads and federal properties as well, you'll see here, now the reason for these dates is during Vietnam there was a heavy look, and there was actually reports published in 57, 58, 62, and 65. But in 62, Congress codified it. But first in 1941, okay, ramp up for World War II. Okay, what happened was we started gearing up already. It's just a fact. Ford had built a bomber plant already. It was tested, Willow Run, 6 months before Pearl Harbor. Ford Motor Company that put out a B-25 every 50 minutes. You can go watch films of it, all black and whites. We knew we were getting into something. So the Fed started planning, how do we do this? Well, first it was the Attorney General could give jurisdiction over roads across federal properties, because as they're eyeballing properties around the U.S. to be ready for what was going to be an imminent mobilization nationwide, we're going to be building this and that, but we can't just cut a city in half. It's spread all over. So we're going to give them jurisdiction across it when we're in the middle of a highway or something. Then, because of the reports which came out of studies required by Eisenhower and signed by executive order, where every agency director of any agency in the government studied it, then it came out in the land use committees and the public lands committees of the Senate and House, and all the findings were published. I have all those books if you want them. That's really boring reading. They extended the power to the executive agency heads generally, like your regional foresters, your secretaries, things like that, for roadways. But also, in 1970 and 76 and 78, Congress reiterated it again over and over. Okay? Now, not just roads, but lands as well. Congress gave the agency directors and secretaries the right to what's called retrocession. So you're retroceding the land back to the state, okay, under your management umbrella. If it no longer serves your charter, your congressional charter, why were you formed as the Forest Service? Why were you formed as BLM or whatever? If it no longer serves a purpose or a need, or there's a petition to get it back, then it should go back, and you don't need to go through Congress. So in 76, the Secretary of the Interior obtained it for all lands with respect to national parks. In 78, the Secretary of Ag was added in the case of forest. because they're two different secretaries. You got USDA and Interior, in other words. Another legal thing that we used, and this one was proven out in multiple cases. This came from the Environmental Law Journal. There's an environmental journal, like a branch of the American Bar Association you can get. I got volumes of that gibberish. It's very boring. It's even more boring than the previous reports. And what they did was, out of the military law review, though, did one of the best reviews because of the base closures. Bush had signed them, Clinton enacted more of them, but when Bush signed them, we're going to have base closures. Suddenly everybody's like, hold up, you've been dumping oil there and unexploded ordnance since World War II, and we don't want the problem of cleaning it up. So whose problem is it? Or, okay, you abandon it and pull out, Army, Marine Corps, whoever, now what do we do with it? Who owns it? So the cleanup thing was the biggest issue. So at that point, Congress made all federal property, including even their own enclaves, the exclusive jurisdiction areas like bases, subject to state environmental requirements. And remember, the county is a political subdivision of the state. So if you need to mandate certain requirements to protect health, safety, and welfare, and you work with your state legislators or the federal agencies, and their properties have to follow them. So I don't think it's unreasonable to protect the air quality, which we can show, and the water quality gets destroyed with wildfires, to start making some minimum requirements. Considering it's been done in the environmental law review, the military law review, over and over. And it's been tried out with the base closures, quite heavy. I was in the middle of those at Fort Ord because it was a real mess. Before California was going to take it back. And California won. And oftentimes it's come up about where I've been in the West. Well, so-and-so LEO from so-and-so agency gave my citizen a ticket. Followed him to town, gave him a ticket. Gave him a ticket for a civil code of the state driving, like tail lights and seat belts. Remember, that one was already tried too. People versus Crucia, that's how you pronounce that one. Federal officer who's outside his jurisdiction loses his law enforcement authority and can make only a citizen's arrest. So when you run into that, we were able to box in our so-called LEOs in our forest, where we live with that as well. So this gives you some of the legal basis, and I want to show you the, if I made a change I didn't mean to. When is that lunch supposed to be, so I don't interrupt?
12:30.
When?
12:30.
Oh, okay, cool. So I'm not good.
So Doyle, how do you determine outside of their jurisdiction?
I'm going to show you the charts. Now what you can do is, oh, this still has Garfield highlighted. Don't worry, I'll get the page the right direction in a second. Your first thing is to, for all your federal properties, is you can do a FOIA to that general counsel's office, or just hand me one of those magic little sticks and I'll give you Utah, the chart. But you might want to do the FOIA for fun, if you want to get some funny answers. But Frisco's really cool to work with, actually. So anyway, your first step is, for all the vast federal holdings, is you can get a book. And it breaks it down by counties. And here's your counties in alphabetical order, and they're given a county code. Now this is your vast holdings: BLM, USDA research stations, waterways, etc. Individual buildings, like maybe they've got a, well, I'll give you a good example. ICE and Homeland Security, they have storage depots all over America. They got 35 buildings just in Phoenix alone. And when you write them, they'll give you a modernized Excel spreadsheet of those, of the they address everything of where that building's at and what it houses. So it's kind of handy to know anyway where all this stuff's sitting. But so when you go into the state chart here, you get down and see there's Utah, of course. I only opened up the Utah section. The counties are again in alphabetical order: Beaver, etc., Box Elder. And then, depending on if there's an agency presence at all, they will list the agency, then the service. So they do like agency level, secretariat level. Then they'll give the name as people know it by. So see here you got USDA, so that's agriculture. Department of Interior, and in this case Bureau of Indian Affairs, and it's the Intermountain School. Has 288.7 acres. But something to keep for that school. But the key thing here is notice this category code. This is this column, which I'll show you up here. It's right here, jurisdictional code. And we talked about the 1 through 4, and I'm going to show you the charts, Doug, like you asked, from this own book here. But this is your code. So this is an exclusive one. This post office, okay, under Bureau of Facilities of the Post Office in Beaver County. 1935, it's got 0.4 acres, okay? But you'll notice the bulk of the land is for that very category, which said, although the federal government may have obtained some form of right or title, the state didn't lose any of its jurisdiction, okay? Now, when you go through your little state list here, that was Garfield's, I was picking on them last time. We're going to go down, and it's in alphabetical order. I'm going to go way down here. I want to get you to the mass part. And what they'll do is they'll summarize different forests. So now let's say you're not worried about a county specifically. You just know that there's this land holding you're curious about, like Dixie. Okay, you don't care where it's at, how many acres in what given county. So here it is, and it's a category 4. The state didn't retain all of its legislative jurisdiction. Every acre of it. Fish Lake, I just showed you a bunch, but actually if you look at here, and what it is, it's any multi-county installation. In this case, Department of Agricultural Forest Service. Every forest in Utah is a category 4. Proprietorial interest only.
The BLM was proprietary, and the Forest Service did have some other type of jurisdiction.
1 through 4. Now the Forest Service and BLM and all agencies like that Post Office, Bureau of Facilities, like there are some USDA research labs, like 4 acres. Things like that the state ceded to them, and they accepted it as an act of Congress that they have exclusive jurisdiction over. But on what we call the public lands, loosely, category 4 is what's throughout your state. So there's all your forest, and you can look up Indian Affairs, BLM, National Parks, whatever you want. So again, don't forget that part about buildings that are all over, that are often short-term leases. That's not uncommon for the GSA, who manages everything, the same place you do a FOIA if you want this chart, from the General Counsel's office. The GSA, they're in charge of knowing the inventories of how many pencils the government has to battleships. It doesn't matter. That's their problem, okay? And what they've discovered is there's literally billions. I've got the reports to show you from January. They have billions of square feet of office space that you're paying on for to sit empty because it's dilapidated to the point that oftentimes it's cheaper to lease in a business mall or lease somewhere else for these little satellite offices. And that's why you'll want to write your regional and get the newest updated charts when you see like a building downtown Salt Lake. Well, what's this new building the Forest Service moved into? Well, it's probably actually a private enterprise that's leasing to the federal government for some duration. And there you can look up every one of those by individual address throughout the state of Utah or any state in the union. And that's because that one constantly fluctuates. Like I guarantee you're going to see starting tomorrow, probably, you're going to see an inundation of insurance people needing building space. Healthcare, what do they call them? Handlers or what? Yeah. So you're going to see there's going to be a lot of leasing for these things that weren't going to cost us nothing starting tomorrow to start.
Are you predicting there's a shutdown?
No, I mean tomorrow is when the mandate pool starts for healthcare. So all your people out there that weren't going to cost nothing. Yeah.
Healthcare.
Yeah. And if there is a shutdown, I mean...
Well, our workforce services have hired 20 full-time people to help with Obamacare.
You know what?
Through our workforce service office, 20 full-time people.
Well, that is creating jobs.
Just remember, every one of
Where do we
those.
get this again, Tim?
Well, I'll just give it to you if you got one of
Okay.
them funny drives. But
I didn't-
what if you go to the GSA, and that was that address with the blue map for your region, they call the Rocky Mountain region. You just write them, and it's the General Counsel's office. Now in Frisco's case, typically if you call them for almost anything, and that may be just their office in that my region, actually they'll email you PDFs and then kind of ask you to follow up with even a halfway FOIA request. Just like, I want this document. Basically, they get kudo points for fulfilling FOIAs, and at the end of every year, every agency is reviewed by Congress, so they get to brag when they say we did 20,000 requests and we fulfilled them all. So, but they actually have emailed me stuff before I've even sent them a letter. Now, they can also be sticklers. When I was doing back east, every time they could refuse a FOIA request, they did so because I had one word wrong. I didn't, I'm asking for stuff, I don't really know the name of it yet in some cases. So they would refuse your request saying that document didn't exist. Even though you know damn well they knew where it was. But I didn't have the right title or the right OMB number or something. So if you get a friendly clerk at that General Counsel's office, don't forget his or her name. Remember it, because they're a wealth of information. Because like you will see with this insurance debacle, and it fluctuates all the time, you're going to see a lot of properties going up and down with leases. And suddenly agencies will be in there and then they'll be out again, and then in again and out again. And that's where you'll want those updated lists. So there's your Utah, and I just show you that in the cases so you can see how it's structured, and you can see, we'll go back down to the bottom again. If it's a multi-county installation, you actually, besides the county breakdowns, you get these by agency at secretariat level. So you've got National Park, Bureau of Reclamation, etc., Defense, Navy, Air Force, etc. It'll give you the category, the acres. See Navy Supply Depot, it's an exclusive. So your state seated it as an act of the Assembly of Utah. The governor signed it and Congress accepted it. Okay? Right there. That's an Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 type of property.
So categories cannot change without state concurrence.
Yeah, correct. In fact, from 1946 on, no agency can do it without a 2/3 vote of your state legislature. Before agencies and state land departments were swapping land, and as of 1946, it has to be legislature, governor's signature, and then adoption by Congress. So if there's now let me tell you the one way around it. You'll start seeing these habitat study areas popping up around all over the U.S. They're popping up in the western states. And you'll see, let's say, Fish and Wildlife trucks or Bureau of Reclamation driving around, and it's like their land all of a sudden, right? And you say, well, heck, we never voted on that and gave that to them, and they didn't accept it. How'd they get it? One of the other thing that's going on right now is like in the years 10, 11, and 12, 2010, 11, and 12, the largest land purchaser in New Mexico was the Nature Conservancy. So what has happened through litigation, bad management policies, is they've wrecked the value of land, ranching, timberlands, water, etc. They're going in and buying this stuff for 10 cents on the dollar, and they're turning around and donating it as habitat corridors to the agencies. And it's one way they circumvent the system. It's like circumventing a congressional wilderness declaration by managing as such, their own words, but calling it a habitat study area or a quiet area. So you could see a piece of property pop up, and that is one of the methods that's occurring. NGOs are purchasing it and giving it to the agencies with stipulations. So, like as in you run it like a wilderness forever.
Well, if that becomes federal government land, doesn't there have to be, even that way, I would think, there's have to be an approval of the county or the state.
At some point, someone's going to have to argue. And the reason these books were published was multiple reasons. The World War II We had a good economy post World War II, and there was a lot of people growing, and we needed some land, and we're wondering, well, nobody's out here training anymore, or nobody's over here doing whatever anymore. So people were arguing about who owned what. Now, a big one that proved a lot of your case data comes from the Ninth Circuit, and it's California being greedy as normal. They were constantly pushing the envelope, including in World War II, of mainly taxes. Can we tax that property? Can we tax their wages of working on base? So there was constant back and forth on dairy operations and these army camps, training camps that were set up as to do we have the jurisdiction to tax it? Not only the property, but their wages that work on there within that base, or did we cede it and it's completely yours? And we don't have any jurisdiction to do that taxation. So taxes drove a lot of the casework in jurisdiction. And California being greedy brought a lot of it out. I would say that right now this conservation and habitat area and habitat study area, boondoggle that's going around like the Nature Conservancy and them, it's not long until that's challenged. They found a little temporary loophole, but it's going to get challenged.
But for the most case, this number 4 category, that's typically what federal lands would be.
Correct.
I know I don't think there's any in Utah, but there's some National Park Service areas that they have total law enforcement authority.
Yeah.
In those Yosemites.
Yeah, and it just depends on and then in some cases, like you take our Tano National Forest, it's what's second largest in the system. And it rolls down from our high country and pines into the desert. And Roosevelt Lake and dam there, it's huge. It's only exceeded by Alaska and whatnot. So if you go there, it's category 4, except for the Tano Monument, which is 1,200 acres. So on that 1,200 acres, out of millions, they have exclusive category 1 jurisdiction. Everything else is category 4. So the state retained all jurisdiction.
So explain category 4, it's proprietary jurisdiction, right? Does that give per se, a BLM the right to have law enforcement?
They can have law enforcement there if they're only enforcing their, if they're not messing with citizens and they're only enforcing what's called the Assimilative Crime Act a long time ago. Basically, the federal government really didn't have very many crimes as we went west, except for like gambling, prostitution, murder. So as these laws never matched state laws, and then in the new territories, what happened was this thing called the Assimilative Crime Act. And theoretically that would lump together all the crimes the Fed is worried about, counterfeiting, piracy, etc. And in their handbook they can enforce those standards in their handbook as long as they're not criminal. So burnt, like let's say a campfire during, let's say, a no fire season in June or something. But although they can enforce that, you should really force them to the table to work out the dates that the fire restrictions are going to be amongst you as a county and them as an agency. And just that example.
It specifically says that they shall contract with local law enforcement.
And our
they're
sheriff,
not doing that, they're just growing.
yes, and in fact our sheriff's department for that peak tourism season, if you will, from May to October-ish, what they've done, now I don't know if this year what's come of it, because the pay was lacking for a couple years back and forth between the U.S. Forest Service from region out of Albuquerque to the county. But it was lawful and better for all of us, people on the ground, that the Apache County Sheriff's Office was who out there, paid by the Forest Service, patrol campgrounds on 4th of July, Memorial Day, and all those heavy weekends. Because as a citizen, I would rather run into you that knows the laws and understands my rights, not some federal bureaucrat. They got an 8-hour class, okay? And B, it's more cost effective, and C, it's a shall, which is probably the biggest clicker.
Is the BLM working in your county?
We don't have BLM.
No BLM at all?
Well, actually we do. We got like 212 acres.
So what about Forest Service? They have LE over there?
Forest Service has LEOs for their campground duties. We have 2 in the entire forest.
And the rest of the sheriff's office.
And in fact, his name is Arona, Officer Arona. Like we were just having to work on some legislation at our state capitol this spring, and as our chief deputy, as he was telling the state panel in the House, basically if Leo Arona sees a DUI, he calls the sheriffs. If he suspects he found a dumped stolen car, he calls the sheriffs. He doesn't get in there and try to play cop or nothing. It's just not his. That's not his problem or his right.
That's been our big fight here since I've been here 20 years.
Them trying to do civil, everything, yeah.
They're trying to, they're out policing everything.
Mm-hmm.
So, under that category 4, here we have a lot of ATV trails.
Mm-hmm.
Like say I get picked up on a trail that I shouldn't be on, or I have a vehicle that's too wide for that trail.
Yeah, over
Do they
60
have the
inches.
authority to
blah,
write
blah,
me a
blah.
ticket, or is that the county sheriff's job?
The county sheriff's job.
What
And in
happens-
fact,
what happens if they write me a ticket?
well, then that's between you and them in the local court.
You've got a piece of toilet paper you can use.
But if they write it, what's going to happen is the first thing they're going to do is, let's say an LEO is going to write, and they all use them. If a Forest Service LEO, like happened locally, he said this young man that he hauled illegal sized logs off the mountain. They were too big for his permit.
Okay.
He followed into town, and that's where the guy finally pulled over. And the guy said, pack sand, and drove home. I'm not signing nothing. So the next week, the ranger's office called and said, we want to talk about, because you did buy the permit and there was a misunderstanding. When they got in there, this young man, when he walked in the office, the LEOs were ready to pounce on him. Luckily, he knew something. And so the first thing he says is, I want my sheriff here. So our chief deputy showed up before they dare make a move. The kid signed it and said, I want a trial. So the first thing that happens is when an LEO, it's going to go to some federal court, in our case, Flagstaff. So as soon as it went to Flagstaff, some locals wrote his letter, and all we did was say, please provide us your jurisdictional right to inflict this in town. They immediately dropped the whole case, and that same thing happened with the ATVs with no turn signals, the V trucks with no seat belts, no stoplights, speeding, on and on and on. And the Tonto had to really get roped in because they were following, they've got a vast forest. This is, like I was telling you, it's huge. So you've got this forest boundary that is just out in the desert, apparently, and you can't see it either, around vast towns and mining districts like Globe and Miami. They were following people into town and pulling them over for speeding and seat belts, because most people buckle and they'll just go okay and get the letter in the mail and write the check for $200 to be done with it, and the Fed made a little extra side money. So, which I get, that's not really uncommon either with those agencies. If they have the chance to extort you out of some money, they'll do so. So you got to call their bluff. Now, some of the other items that are in your informational folder, before we get into lunch and whatnot, I wanted to show you something. Since we were talking about mills and timber and water, 2/3 of your water supply comes from forested areas, etc. This is from the Pulp and Paper Manufacturing Association. This is a map of U.S. forests, and it was updated in 12. This was 11 published. My spreadsheet, which is part of your packets, right here, is updated through 12. These are all the mill closures. Now I want you to think about something. Last week in the news, it's come up 3 different times. China is having a buying spree on timber. Now, typically Russia would be supplying this, but because of tensions in the Middle East, Russia is cutting off a lot of the sales to China. Okay, so basically China has this smorgasbord buying spree going on now across America for timber, futures, just like they did concrete, just like they did copper, etc., etc. But keep this in mind when you're thinking about jobs and why it's important the states get their land back. Full divestiture, back to the states. The Fed is causing things like this to happen. These are all closures across America, while other countries are expanding in untold amounts. These are all new mills opened over there. We're becoming, again, we're not exporting products again, manufactured wooden goods, we're importing in almost every industry. Also, something to keep in mind is when you say, well, why, maybe someone would say, I can't believe anybody in this room. I hope not. But if you go, there's a thing called the Food and Agricultural Organization, and our Forest Service every decade writes a state of forestry in the United States, but every year they report to the UN's Food and Agricultural Organization the current findings. So here we are, added a net 19,019,000 acres in the last decade reported. I put the red in there because hectares, remember, a lot of people aren't. But in other words, we're adding forestry at a rate of 938,600 acres per year. New forest. That's how fast the growth is exceeding our extraction. Yet we're still closing down and we still don't have jobs and we're burning it up. There is not a shortage. We have a growth in America. So when that line gets pulled on, you don't fall for that one either, okay? This is brand new data because each year, at the end of the year, they finally about June release the data for the previous year. So I say new in that sense. Come December 31st of 12, they start crunching numbers January 1st. June they release the data, and this is from the 2012. So it's the newest you can get. But that's your growth we're burning up while we're saying we don't have anything. Well, China's not stupid. They're buying it. Okay? They're buying control of it. They're opening the mills, and we're even going to be, while we burn our wood up, we're going to sell the rest of it to them and have to buy it back. Oh, here's an article. I didn't even know I had put one in here for you. That's just recent, the 19th of September. So that's in that folder thing for you all. This is from the Forestry Journal, one of the forestry journals I subscribe to. When it comes,
that last statistic you had, how is the forests in the nation growing? Is that what that was saying?
Yeah, growth versus extraction. In other words, we are actually milling and doing so little timber harvesting anymore that our forest areas are expanding.
You talking about area or density of trees?
Area.
Area.
Yes, that's acres, not density. Density's a whole nother bear to wrestle with.
So, I don't understand, we're buying more or?
No, it's just, let's say here's this forest last year, and it's this piece of dirt out here. It's growing because we're doing so little harvesting anymore.
That makes sense.
Yeah, 900 and something thousand acres a year growth. And that's from our own agencies. I didn't make that number up. That's what they promulgated. But we're still to blame for deforestation, they go on to say later, because if we quit buying from foreign countries, they would quit cutting, and South America would quit cutting their jungles down or something along those lines. So it's still our fault, even though our forests are increasing.
Most of the trees here aren't very big.
No.
We don't have 40 per acre anymore, we have 1,000.
Yeah.
Pretty small.
Yeah, and that's the problem.
But if they're making toothpicks, we can help them.
Yeah, yeah, or pallets, and that's about it, yeah. Pallets that ship Walmart goods back to you. Also well, it's true. When you got also, this one is February 26th, but in Scientific America, this was updated in August again. Finally published in July, because peer-reviewed papers, etc. This is proving one of the other aspects of why is it important the states get back the land and the counties and states start managing again for health, safety, welfare, which includes productivity. We keep hearing about air quality and global warming and climate change. This is just one of many brand new scientific papers that I have showing where the smoke from the wildfires in America are putting off more smog and more so-called greenhouse gases than industrial America is. And in fact, the California Forestry Institute used the NASA models that Al Gore brags about. They used the same computer system, the same satellite system on purpose. 2 weeks of wildfire in the western U.S. put out the cumulative greenhouse gas of 700,000 cars ran 24/7 for 365 days a year, and all of the industrial output of America. They put out the same amount of smog in 2 weeks.
Was there any CO2 on that?
Mm-mm, not at all. So, I mean, every direction that we hear reasons why we can't manage our land, we don't have a choice. We can protect air quality, we can make jobs, we can have safer communities, less juvenile delinquency and crime. We have a legal basis, we have a definite economic reason. And if you're into having clean air and water and fishing and whatever, you've got a good reason there too. Since 2/3 of our nation's drinking supply is being impacted by the catastrophic fires. So there's a bunch of reasons why you should be, really proactive on this. Now I wanted to talk about a couple other trends I'm seeing around the western U.S. that it's, I see it up here, and I've seen some inklings of it in Arizona, of course, and New Mexico. It's a western states issue again. This one seems to be leading the way, and it's kind of an updated version of land swaps, if you will. And basically it's, imagine sitting at the table with the adversaries that for 20 years have shut down all your industries and then groveling for a little bit of rights. And now they're going to say, okay, yeah, we'll do some compromise, etc. This is one of the most recent test cases. This is from the 29th of September. So as you can see, it's not really old, but I think something to be leery of, because I'm seeing this throughout the West due to CEQA in California. Right now it's going on in Oregon because the Oregon spotted frog versus the ONC lands, which were supposed to be dedicated to timber. So there's been some land swaps. Now Montana, but look at this. See, they got at least 100,000 acres in national forest for logging, but let's finish. While also creating 667,000 acres of new wilderness. So when I went to school, I think they still lost out when I do the math. And I'm afraid, and I'm not saying this insultingly at all because I really respect your state a ton, but I'm afraid some of the Bishop plan is going this way. So I just be leery because you're right here in the heart of it. Because I haven't seen a plan yet that swaps land back and forth, that sits mutually at the table, that has worked. So, or it ends up like Secure Rural Schools Act. Don't worry, this is 5 years from now, but we promise we'll renew it for 20. And then when you get to the end of 5 years, you might get a 1-year extension. And then every year its survivability is in question. But the whole time they've dropped it by 50% as well. So we got to really watch out for those short-term gains if it's going to do long-term damage. And unfortunately, this tester bill, having gotten across the aisle congressional support, that across the aisle thing again, unfortunately it's making some big headway now. It's this new novel concept. So I mean, the math's right there. They got 100,000 to now log, but they locked up 667,000 additional acres.
Permanent.
Huh?
Permanent.
Mm-hmm. Because it's wilderness.
I tend to think if everybody understood the federal government's definition of wilderness, I believe even by far the majority of the people supporting wilderness understood the definition and what it can be used for once it's allocated, they wouldn't support it.
No, probably not.
Because I think people, we watch the advertisements here in Utah, and you see wonderful scenic areas that we all drive right up to that are shown as, and they're touting wilderness. We need to protect our wilderness. That, what we're looking at is not wilderness. You couldn't drive up to it, which wilderness.
Correct.
Even the people that ride bicycles, all of these people that have traditionally supported all of the environmental organizations do not understand what wilderness is.
Yeah. Well, you can't hardly fight a fire in them because remember Babbitt stopped all that mechanical firefighting. You can't drop borate in them. So like in our Wallow fire that could have been stopped, the first day, 1,200 acres in 24 hours was it. No, we had to let it grow to a rate where it hit 70,000 acres per day growth, per day. And leave the wilderness area, the Wallow wilderness area before they could fight it. Now it had such a head of steam on it, you weren't stopping it.
The real problem, another real problem that I see here is that 100,000 acres that they think is safe now, it's only safe until they've secured the 667,000 acres, and then they're gonna come back and they're gonna want some.
Notice of intent to sue.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
They're gonna want that. The concept of hard release is only a concept, it doesn't
Correct.
agree in real fact.
Correct.
That's why I'm really concerned about the Bishop bill, because.
I am
you know,
too, because you guys are great neighbors, and I have, and I know you can ask my better half who's out playing somewhere today with the doggies. We have seriously considered, and I have old family up here in Utah. It goes way back, multiple generations, moving here. And I mean, it's a good. You guys are good neighbors, and I see this stuff popping up. So I'm just saying that out there. It's just, please look at the details. Don't fall for the short-term gain. And then on this forest deal, there's always been lots of questions about that, but I keep in mind again on that forest thing. I know a lot of people in the country have their eyes on us because of that, but we don't have anything yet. Okay? So, and I think it's because again we've got this mishmash of ideals sitting at the table. Everybody's going to collaborate, use all the C words. Okay? And kumbaya, even though that's a K word. But we don't have anything actually going yet. And I know that we went through all the contractor debates, and then the contractor couldn't fulfill their agreement. But then they said the Forest Service didn't give us their money. And everybody was still pointing fingers. But remember, all the while, we have 7 years of growth versus extraction exceeding it by 400%. And all those years, we keep setting new record wildfires while everybody's at the table negotiating. We're losing, okay? And we lose the 19 firefighters that you're now, and many others that deserve credit too. That just took all the spotlight recently. Why they're at the table negotiating. And then also you have to do the math. It's for forest restoration initiative for a reason. Now, first off, it was supposed to be 100,000 acres a year. When they conceived it and got the grant process, the grant mechanism, which is the collaborative restoration grant, out of the regional offices, and that's the thing I told you where they've spent $2.4 million and we've had meetings. Okay, now that is now from 100,000 acres a year to 30,000. Then you got to divide that by 4 forest, so now you have 7,500, give or take, per forest per year. 7,500 acres, that's all, per forest per year, if it gets moving. And then to top it off, the newest named contractor is a foreign firm out of Africa that got it, that does have a shell front in Arizona, I'll give them that. But it's a world corporation for global sustainability and sustainable forestry out of Oman in Africa with almost all foreign officers. So I don't see that that's very wise either. So don't sit back and wait thinking forestry is going to be a model that you can just mimic, and it's because it's going to just kick right off, because it's going to been just kick right off for 7 years now. So, and one of the things they said, like I say, their chief forester, I don't know if that volume's even on there or not, because a couple of you asked to break.
For us. And as far as what we're going to do on each acre of land, it depends. To be honest, to be truly responsive to restoration needs of our ecosystems, we need to be flexible out there. Some acres are going to be thicker than others. There's so many things to consider. The goal of this will be the flexibility that we have when we're out in the forest. And again, the goal is restoration. It is not supplying the timber industry.
Let's go back to that though. If we go back to that one, because you got to hear the beginning of it. It's very telling on why it got so much
part of the
before.
initiative is actually closing roads. So part of the goal of Fry is actually to close, in some cases, up to a third of the mileage of roads that's out in the forest. And as far as what we're going to do on each acre of land, it depends. To be honest, to be truly responsive to restoration needs of our ecosystems, we need to be flexible out there. Some acres are going to be thicker than others. There's so many things to consider. The goal of this will be the flexibility that we have when we're out in the forest. And again, the goal is restoration. It is not supplying the timber industry.
Who's speaking?
That's Chief Mark Provencio, the chief forester for the entire team.
Forest Service.
Mm-hmm. And that's a PBS special that it was kind of a sick situation why our town is evacuated in our county, and people under immense stress for a record-setting fire. PBS ran a 30-minute special, and because PBS is taxpayer funded, they had to give me a copy of that television program. So there's 30 minutes of hearing Mark Provencio, the Grand Canyon Trust, the Center for Biological Diversity, Suckley, their president, all of them on stage patronizing each other about this program. But one thing they stressed the whole 30 minutes was that right there. This is not about supplying the timber industry. At another segment, it's not about helping the cattle industry. And then, of course, throughout the theme is one of the big goals is closing roads. Now remember, those roads are economic drivers for all of you in rural America. And they're search and rescue, they're everything. So, I know a lot of people have worked real hard on forests that had some high hopes, but a doctorate in forestry that's a personal friend of mine who quit, who helped founded the committee before they had a name of forest, she left and quit. And I asked her when she came by my house to tell me that she was not only quitting the Fry, but the entire regional and going out in the private sector for the University of Colorado system to study aspens. I said, what's the end? She goes, well, it's going to be the same inevitable end. We're going to sit at the table with our collaborative partners, and they're going to have all the info that they ever needed without even having to try to do records releases and sue to get info, because they've been sitting at the table and they're going to sue us into non-existence. So don't wait on plans like that to fix everything. The counties need to take the lead in the states. The federal government and agencies haven't shown enough gumption to be able to carry off a project. If they can't get 5,000 acres cut in your county in a year, how are they going to pull off? And here's that other one I wanted you to see about that waters of the U.S. before we go to This is from the EPA, and this is that push I told you about. Basically, when the Clean Water Restoration Act came for renewal and expanded to even like water that gathered after rainstorms in Wyoming and Montana, the prairie dog towns, was deemed as navigable waters. Just the most absurd definition I've ever heard. It looked like it was all but beat, and the EPA and the Corps of Engineers has come back out with a revised one. So they've renamed the same thing. So be watching this. This is brand. This is 9/20, the 20th. This was released. You don't.
Culverts, storm drains, roadside ditches, flood control programs.
Yeah. It's
We had it whipped.
Yeah, we thought we had it whipped, and in fact,
It was whipped
Yeah.
in Congress.
in Congress.
So Obama did the next thing he knows how to do, and that's to go the administrative.
Administrative
That's
route.
the same
Yeah.
thing we've done with wilderness. We've just changed the name of it and said, now we're gonna do this.
And if you read this report cited right here, this is in your folder. See this released the draft report of the connectivity of streams and wetlands to downstream waters. I have the maps, and the entire United States is connected from shore to shore. And that which will be used as, quote, the scientific basis needed to clarify Clean Water Act jurisdiction. So I doubt it has much to do with water quality. If you draw long enough, you can make all the water connect to each other, and that's what they did on their map. That whole report's right there if you want it. That big one I'm saying right there, when you click on this, it's like a link. You can. So,
Yeah, we got 30 minutes for lunch. We'll do a quick lunch and then we'll get into the grazing piece.
Yeah, the grazing and water, and also Supervisor Weller here, he had to come in late because of traveling. This is Supervisor Weller from.
Just here to watch.
Mhm.
I've seen
He's
most of
good.
it before.
Yeah.
I get to be cheered up by him almost on a daily basis.
You actually could do it.
So,